So welcome to my presentation, and I'm going to be talking about how we can help develop graduate attributes by engaging students in SoTL. So I'll describe the student cohort how they're developed, how scholarship is embedded into some of the projects that we've been doing, how these relate to graduate attributes. I'll discuss some of the results and have my own reflections at the end. So I work at the University of Glasgow in the School of Maths and Statistics. So this in particular is in relation to our level 4 statistics students who have to take a project as part of their undergraduate degree programme. And so this is very much the focus here. So in terms of the project that level 4 students have to do, then these are the project aims, i.e. it gives them experience working independently to analyse a data set and using some sort of statistical methodology, and they help develop their written and verbal presentation and communication skills. So, fairly clear cut. So looking at the actual intended learning outcomes for these projects, we can actually see how they actually map directly onto the graduate attributes that we have at the University of Glasgow. So the first is very much around subject specialism, and of course all these kind of bullet points given here are taken directly from the intended learning outcomes of the project. So you can see here this is incorporated in lots of different ways where students have to have that knowledge and statistical analyses, be able to pick out appropriate methods and use them in a valid and appropriate way, and have some sort of programming skills in order to do that. So the second graduate attribute is we want students to be investigative, and of course projects in themselves give that opportunity for students to develop that skill where they're having to look into the background of the project, particular aims, and then formulate that question of interest. So in order to do this, they have to be resourceful and responsible, and of course the projects in themselves give students a really good opportunity to work independently. And of course, as we've mentioned already, one of the project outcomes is about communication, and part of the assessment for the project is students doing a presentation. So they get opportunity in terms of the learning outcomes of the project to work on their effective communication skills. And of course, part of the project is all about that reflection at the end. So when students do an analysis, then it's always at the end point where they actually look back and think, God, that didn't quite work out the way I expected it to, or maybe there's things I could have done differently. I could have perhaps used a different model, a different framework, or I could have formatted the data in a different way. Whatever it may be, there's always that kind of opportunity at the end to actually reflect on what you've done. And of course, the main thing here is explaining limitations, which is super important in statistics. So this actually only takes us halfway through the graduate attributes. So we're just going to now think about the rest of the attributes that we might want students to develop. And I'm going to do this by talking about the particular SoTL-based projects that I'm currently offering to students. So in the first academic year I've done this, 21-22, so the year prior to this year, I used two different projects, the first on teaching excellence and the second on student boredom, and I've kind of given the name of the particular paper that I use with students to develop these projects. And then this year I incorporated a graduate employability project, which it follows a very, very similar structure to the first two, and of course using the particular reference given here, this was the starting point for that project. So where I think these projects really are different from the other types of projects students have on offer is firstly to do with ethical approval. So students have to more or less, based on the references I'd given in the previous slide, write a survey, adapt it to the particular cohort they're interested in, and of course to do that they have to get ethical approval. And strangely enough, given how much we actually work with data and statistics, it's not something that we actually do that often or think about that often. We always think somebody else will deal with the ethics, or we're only there to analyse the data, but these projects in themselves give students that direct opportunity to think about ethical approval. So once they've done that, then they can adapt the survey, then they have to distribute it to students in the cohort. So in this particular case, we've always kind of concentrated on level 4 math and stats students. Download the data, which is always a fun step. Format the data. So all of the surveys mentioned in the previous slide have different types of data. We have student demographic data, lots of Likert scale questions, open data. So of course, formatting the data appropriate for a statistical analysis is a really important step here, which again maybe doesn't come into play as much in other types of projects. And then once they've done that, then they can start working on the actual statistical analyses on that extensive data set they've almost had to create themselves. And of course, talk about it. So based on all this, well, how do I perceive these kind of SoTL-based projects to actually top up that mapping to our graduate attributes? And the first thing is about independent and critical thinking. So students more or less have to write the survey using an appropriate software and of course adapt it to their particular cohort. So they're really creating that whole survey, and then they're going to distribute it to the relevant cohort. And of course, distribution to pretty much the other people in their class, it can take a level of confidence that maybe other students don't have to quite get to grips with. And of course, adaptability is super key here, where these are real data, they're collected in real time, and data do not always work out or behave the way we want them to. And of course, students get direct experience of that, and they have to adapt what they had in mind to the particular data that they then collect. And of course, as we've discussed already, working with data ethically is so important, but these projects give students that direct experience of having to work within that ethical approval. So the last graduate attribute that I'm really having to think about is collaboration. So although projects by nature give students the opportunity to collaborate with a member of staff, these projects in a way allow students to collaborate with the other people in their class because they're asking for their help. But I also think there's further opportunity here that I've just not explored yet in terms of students collaborating with each other on similar projects. So at the moment there's 3 projects, they all follow a relatively similar framework. So, there's real opportunity here to allow students to kind of work together and get, just understand what other people are doing in that similar setting. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to expand this further. So in terms of the project results, I'm just going to give 2 key things. So the first in terms of teaching excellence, and I think this quote from one of the surveys where students were asked their definition of teaching excellence, where we say that the best lecturers are the ones that prepare for the exam and not necessarily the ones that expire in the subject, is a surprisingly common theme over the past 2 years. And in terms of graduate employability, when students are asked what skills they developed in their programme that will help them, then they were really quick to identify subject-specific skills, but when they asked what skills they think will actually be helpful in employment, they were really, really quick to identify these professional skills that maybe we're just not incorporating that much at the moment into our programmes. Students don't get the opportunity to practice these things as much as the kind of more subject-specific skills. So the first thing that I really want to reflect on is I've given you my perception of these projects, but I've not told you anything about the student perception. And this is actually something I wanted to follow up on last year, but I was kind of stuck in that mindset very naively that I didn't have enough students to actually do this. And looking back, I think that was just me in that quantitative frame of mind thinking that I need more students, I need more time to get more information. And of course, thinking about my own scholarship journey, so influences on my scholarship experience, you realise there's so much more to people and so much more to experiences rather than just numbers. It's hard to say, but it's so true. So it's definitely something I'm going to follow up in future. And of course, I can still adapt the system and make changes to it by trying to build in that more collaborative framework for students where they can work together. So I can take a further step back and say, well, let's learn from each other rather than me sitting, giving my point of view. And of course, what my interest in asking you guys who are listening is, well, are these actual scholarship projects or the teaching and learning projects? Do they come under that framework or not? So yeah, so that is pretty much everything that I've got to say, I guess, other than this is called Developing Graduate Attributes by Engaging Students with Scholarship, and that's fully what I intended it to be. But when I was just sitting thinking about it, it's actually made me realise how much it's helped me adapt my skills in terms of kind of scholarship practice, and there's so much opportunity for me to learn, not just students. So thank you very much for listening. I've left my email address here on this slide, and I'm more than happy if anyone's got any comments or suggestions or anything at all, please do send me an email. Thanks very much.